Zibi, Bujo, Maingan and Deshnikas, Deshkan Zibi and Ojiba, Maingan Dodem. My name is Maingan. I'm your host of this show called Niche Vibes. And we welcome everybody here because we are going to have a chance to talk to some pretty wonderful people. But before we go, I wanted to let you know that we are now on Spotify, which is an avenue that we can actually send throughout the world and let people know about what we're doing and hopefully have a good understanding of ourselves and the people that we interview on the show. So today we have a very special guest, but I wanted you to know that here at the university, there has been a major commitment to reconciliation. And in building a plan that allows for the voice of Indigenous people, it takes a commitment from the executive level, and we've achieved that over the last couple of years. We've been able to build within the framework of University of Waterloo a really sustaining plan that gives us a chance to get included within the curriculum and the governance of this university. So I'm really excited about the future of indigenization here at the University of Waterloo. But well, I'm going to bring you a component of that with our special guest. We have a new member of our university who started over the summertime to help us build, I guess, events opportunity, which demonstrates the commitment and also the culture of Indigenous people here in this university. So I want to introduce you to Gladwin Badger, who comes all the way from Alberta to join us here at the university. Welcome, Gladwin.
Oh, thanks for having me, Megan.
Happy to have you here. Thanks so much.
Yes, this is such a great opportunity for me to, get connected with the university and all the projects that you have going on. You're such a, busy individual, well-respected individual in the community, and I'm happy to be here.
How did you find your way here? Like, you come from Alberta, and you're over here, way over in Waterloo, Ontario.
Yeah, well, I always say, I kind of was taking a Sunday drive, and I took a left turn when I was supposed to take a right turn, and that's kind of how I ended up out this way. No, but so I got it this way. May 2023. I just finished my undergrad. I'm a mature student. I went to university a little bit later, trying to figure things out and whatnot. So it took me a little while. So I found my passion and my calling in post-secondary education in music. And so I spent, 4 years studying at the university, MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta. And then I just decided to I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So after I finished my degree, and I just took a chance at, what if I tried, a master's degree, graduate school. And so I applied to Queen's University, and surprisingly they let me in. And so I studied arts leadership at Queen's University, Master of Arts Leadership, and then I migrated, further and further south and west, I guess. Did my work placement at Indigenous record label Red Music Rising in Toronto, and then I saw this position became available, and I'm such a advocate of indigenization, reconciliation, and I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to apply for this position, and this is how I ended up here.
It's just I'm just laughing because Indigenous people are kind of like that. They'll kind of just travel and see what comes next sometimes, and sometimes good opportunities come, and we're lucky to have you here at the university. you've expressed to us that music is your high interest. You've got a master in music, and you're a performer also, a producer. You've been doing a lot of work in that area. So maybe let's go there. Let's talk about your music interest and what you're hoping to achieve in that field.
Okay, sure. Well, geez, where can I start? So I guess basically where it started, I mean, I didn't grow up with a musical family. I guess, like, I grew up with my more with my family, my mom's side of the family. So, but when my father was around, he was a musician. And his brothers, my uncles, were also kind of musicians, but not like established. They knew how to play guitar, and that's something I kind of gravitated towards. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then for my birthday, I don't know what birthday it was. I was like pretty young. I remember I hadn't seen my dad for a long time. He came into my bedroom. It was my birthday, and my birthday is, in January. It's in the winter. And I was sleeping, and he came into my room. Like, he just kind of barged into my room as I'm sleeping. And he has a guitar and an amp that's like, I don't know. It's like, it was just really huge, heavy. Never saw anything like it. I was like, whoa. And it looked like some kind of an antique. I had no idea what this thing was. It's like a trunk. That's how big it was. I was like, whoa. And he's like, he doesn't even really say anything. He just says, happy birthday, puts my guitar there, puts my amp there. He's tracking snow into the house and all of this. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm half asleep. I'm like, oh, nice to see you too, Dad. We'll see you next year. So yeah, that guitar stayed in my room for about a year, and then I started toying around with it, and I was like, well, you'd hit the open strings and all this stuff, but it wasn't until I got to like high school where I had, my friends started learning how to play guitar as well, and I went over to a friend's house, and he started showing me how to play this guitar riff by Metallica. It was the song One. I don't know, are you familiar with it?
Yes, I am.
So yeah, that opening guitar riff,
Yeah.
He started playing it. I was like, whoa, that's cool, like, can you show me how to play that? So he shows me how to play it. And I'm playing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I was hooked ever since, right? I was hooked playing guitar. I started learning, to read tablature and all this stuff. Started reading on the internet about other songs. So I started becoming familiar that way. And it took some time to. I didn't actually perform for the longest time because I was so shy, so scared to get out in front of people, until I went to college. At Red Deer College, they had a music performance prep program, and I had forgotten everything I learned about music, in elementary, and then I went to this audition at a college, and I knew how to play Johnny Cash tunes. I knew how to play all these cowboy chord songs. I passed their audition somehow, and they let me in, and that's where, I learned all the music theory, production, all this stuff, and performance, getting over all of that. Because, like I said, for the most part, I was a bedroom a bedroom musician, a bedroom performer.
That's good because, a lot of people start in various ways. And I know whatever inspires you, you can turn back to and say how you got interested in something like this. So, you didn't see your dad for a while, but he brought you something that's going to be everlasting for you.
Oh, if it wasn't for that time, I don't know, I don't know where I'd be, right? Because music, you know, it's everything to me. It's my first love. It's my only love, and it's brought me here. Like that set me on a path, and you know, I just I don't really know what else to say about it. It's just it's brought me so many opportunities, even outside of music, right?
Well, I think music in general, you know, it's something we can all relate to in a very personal way. And if you are able to perform, I think it gives people, you know, a good sense of feeling, you know, because we can always turn to music when times are hard. In fact, the blues was built on that, hard times. But whatever you get as a feeling when you make other people feel comfortable, that's an amazing feeling. Like,
Yeah.
so when you do perform, you know, do you think about the music, or are you watching the people, or what goes through your mind at that time?
Like when I'm actually performing
Yeah.
a gig or something.
Yeah.
Well, it's more about hitting the right notes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hitting the right notes is, you know, is the crowd, you know, are they watching? Are they involved? Are they interested? You know, those kind of things. Sorry, and then
Yeah, just kind of like that, you know, like do you get a chance to notice the fans or the people out there watching? And
yeah, for sure. And that's, you know, I've been to gigs where like nobody's in the crowd, and you know, that's really discouraging as well. But you gotta kind of, as a musician, as a performer, you gotta kind of get over those and persevere and try to, I guess, build on that, right? So try to alter your show into making it a more of an engaging experience for the audience. Yeah.
one thing I always wanted to ask a guitar player is, when you get your music down, like you've played it 100,000 times, and do you can just do it by muscle memory at that point, or you still have to concentrate, you know, especially when you're timing other musicians?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on, if you're, I guess I would say that's kind of an interesting question, because for me as a guitar player, I mean, I could play, you know, I could play pentatonic scales and major and minor scales and, you know, cowboy chords. I could play those over and over and over again, and you know, you become good at those. And I don't know, I think there comes a point where, you know, you start learning the once you learn those things, I mean, there's really not much growth as a musician, as a, you know, as a performer. So you're always, for me, I'm always looking to improve, and I think this is like, you know, a lot of musicians are the same way. But for me, it's jazz. Jazz is always my thing to look towards, because I find it so challenging, and it's endless. It's an endless style of music that I still can't wrap my head around. It's just so difficult and so challenging, and that's why I love jazz so much.
I noticed in jazz it's kind of unorthodox, I guess, compared to other genres of music, because you can go through styles. But jazz, when I was down in New Orleans, stopped in watched a few bands there, and out of the blue, you know, the drummer will come in, you know, whatever. It just doesn't have a standard set, you know, that normal music would have.
Yeah.
And that's what I think it's really good about it.
Yeah, well, so I mean, they have jazz standards, like, so, you know, you'll have your Autumn Leaves, you'll have your, you know, Satin Dolls kind of songs, All of Me's, but the melody to the song, the form of the song is, you know, can stay the same. But what's really interesting is just the interpretation and how you deliver those songs, because you can play All of Me in like a swing style, but you can play it in a bossa style, you can play it in a ballad style. Yeah, there's just so many, and then you got the improv part, right? The whole improvisation, and it's just a whole new tune. So you open a real book, and you'll have Autumn Leaves, which is something, it's a staple for any emerging jazz artist. When you learn a jazz song, when you say to your teacher, "Hey, I want to learn jazz," this is the song that they always start with, Autumn Leaves, right? So, but it can, like I said, those songs, even though it's on paper, this is how you write, this is how you play the song, it can just turn into something totally different every time.
Well, people have different musical ears, right? Like something draws you to a certain genre of music, and you can play with it. I've seen artists take, very popular songs and change it around, the arrangements, and it comes out pretty good, for a lot of people. So do you experiment that way? Do you kind of, I know you learn the cowboy chords and stuff like that, but did you kind of change any of the arrangements of songs from time to time?
Yeah, so that was for me, going, like, learning about music theory and all that, going through university, because like I said, I didn't come really from a musical family. Mm-hmm. I wasn't exposed to it as often as a lot of musicians are out there. So I felt like I had to go to school and formal education to learn about music. But to answer your question, so there's a song, "Bad Moon Rising" by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to see what it would sound like if I played it in a minor key. So I started playing it in minor keys and not in major keys, and it just takes a different, it's just a different mood, because "Bad Moon Rising" is a very uplifting, happy song. So then you turn it into a minor key, and it just sounds dark and sad, and that was fun. That was my first time ever experimenting with taking a known, popular song and turning it into something different, and that was a lot of fun.
You remind me, I went to Value Village one time, and there was a bass guitar, a Fender bass there, and they just brought it out. And I don't know anything about a bass guitar, but I went and checked it out, and they told me the price. It was like $400 for the guitar, straps and case and a book and wires and everything. So I thought that was a pretty good deal. But I asked the person, like, is that the best price you can have? And she said, I'll have to go get my manager. So it was one of my students from the college I used to teach at was the manager. So she came over and said, I'll give it to you for $100. So what? So yeah, I'll take it. It was a nice looking bass guitar. So I took it to the music shop, and the guy looked at it. He said, this guitar hasn't even hardly been played. It's like, it needs tune up, but it's definitely a really good bass guitar. And I said, well, I don't know how to play bass or anything. I don't even know how to play guitar very good, but I'll take it home and mess around with it. And I got home and I hooked it up to the sound stuff I had and started playing it. And I was having so much fun with it. Like, I didn't know what I was doing, but it sounded good. I was trying to remember a song that I was trying to play, and it didn't sound like that, but whatever came out was good. But I think that's what I mean about music, like whether you have training or, you have some kind of family background, I think you get that guitar in your hand and start messing around. Maybe nobody else likes what they're hearing, but you do.
Yeah, for sure.
That was definitely the case there. Everybody, turn that down. No, I want to jam with that.
Yeah, totally.
So, who are your musical heroes?
Musical heroes, my older brother, he's a few years, he's like 10 years older than me, so he was my biggest influence when I was introduced to music. But and at that time, was the AC/DCs and Metallicas and classic rock kind of stuff, right? And my my mom would listen to George Jones and Travis Tritt and Marty Stewart and all these kind of country guys. So it's kind of a weird thing. But I never really looked to those artists, those bands as inspiration. I mean, like Metallica, learning the Metallica songs really, introduced me to playing the guitar, and not so much AC/DC because they're like very blues based. They're kind of the same, structure throughout their whole catalog. But when I got to music school, then I started, like I said, learning more about other jazz musicians. So I started listening to Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jeff Healey and stuff like that. So these are more blues guys. But when I heard Stevie Ray Vaughan and that guitar tone and the way he would play, Scuttlebutton and Voodoo Child and all these things, I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy is a killer. And I was addicted to Stevie Ray Vaughan, and he was probably the biggest influence on me as to why I wanted to pursue, an education in music.
Wow.
Yeah, but then after I was in music school, then I got exposed to Wes Montgomery, Joe Pass, Chet Baker, Buddy Rich on the drums, and all these kind of guys. Sonny Rollins, tenor sax. Yeah.
So with those influences, I think it led you to produce your own music, and that's what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I never thought I'd ever go down this path. Because I went to music school wanting to be like Stevie Ray Vaughan and all of these things. I just want to be the greatest guitar player that I could be. I mean, nobody can be Stevie Ray Vaughan. Like he's his own thing, right? But yeah, I just wanted to be the best guitar player that I could be, and hopefully, kind of emulate, Stevie Ray Vaughan. But when I was in, doing these things and playing these shows, there comes a point where you just kind of want to be more creative, and just playing a solo and whatever, being creative that way, yeah, that's fun. But it doesn't, I don't know, I just want to be more creative. So I was like, well, how do I start writing my own stuff, right? So I don't know. I started messing around with writing music, and that's kind of how I started. So I started messing around with writing music, and I don't really know anything about writing music at this point. So I said, okay, well, what do I know? I know how a song structure for hard rock and heavy metal songs go. So I started listening to more Judas Priest. I was listening to Judas Priest, and like I said, I wanted to start writing songs, and I heard the song "Breaking the Law," right? Breaking the Law, and then I started transcribing the chord progression of that song. I'm like, okay, well, here's a chord progression. Let's see what I can do with this. So I, put it into my DAW and all this stuff. I started recording it, and then I started coming up with a melody and all this stuff. And nothing was working for me. I was like, no, that doesn't sound, I can be a little bit too critical of my own creativity, right? So for a long time, I really struggled with what this piece of music was going to sound like. And then I'm a really big fan of Quentin Tarantino.
Right.
And Pulp Fiction, that soundtrack, when that soundtrack came out, and I heard that, and I watched that movie, I saw the soundtrack, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is made. What is this sound? And it was surf, right? It was a surf sound, and I hung on to that song, to that sound for the longest time. And then I saw the documentary film Rumble, the Indians Who Rocked
Right.
the World, and Link Ray, and that song Rumble, Link Ray was on Pulp Fiction. So I was like, okay, this is so cool. You can actually write music people are still doing this. They're still writing surf music. So I took that song, that chord progression from Breaking the Law. I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? And I started, changing the keys and all these things, and started changing the keys. And then, like I said, oh yeah, well, I'm gonna make a surf song out of this. So that's kind of how I started writing songs. I made a surf song out of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah.
So tell me about this exciting thing that's going to happen pretty soon. You're releasing your first EP.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess on November 22nd. Yeah, so that's for whoever's watching at home. This is Monday. It's going to be released on Friday, November 22nd. It's my first EP, and it's called Renegade, which is, the inspiration, the song that I've been talking about is called Renegade. So yeah, it's my first EP. I released a song, my first single, which was 2 years ago. On Remembrance Day, I released that Remembrance Day 2022, and that song was called Res Rock. So I spent the last couple of years since I released that song trying to finish my degree, and all last year I had like essentially no time to write music or play music because I was trying to finish my grad studies, but now that that's over now, I have a little bit more time to dedicate to music. So I met up with a producer in Toronto, and he really digs the music that I write, and so we ended up collaborating and working to finish this project that I've been wanting to finish and for a long time, and it's finally here. It's kind of crazy.
So Renegade, we're looking for that. Where can we find that when it comes out on the 22nd?
So yeah, you'll be able to stream Renegade on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Deezer, all these streaming platforms. Yeah.
Excellent. So how does an artist make money at this anymore? Do they make money?
You can. So there's a few ways. Obviously touring and merchandise and all that stuff. But the streaming, you don't make a lot of money. Streaming your music, I think it's like 0.003
Yeah.
cents on the dollar. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of streaming. So I mean, you can sell your music on platforms like Bandcamp. So there's a lot of exclusive releases on Bandcamp. You can't find a lot of music on streaming platforms like Spotify and Amazon and all these. You have to go to Bandcamp to find this music. The other way, though, for us Indigenous music, there's not just for us, but there's a channel on Sirius XM called Indigiverse, and those, every time you get a spin on Indigiverse, it produces a pretty good payout for the artist. So,
that's good.
So the goal is to get your music spun on Sirius XM.
So I want your opinion on something. I was at the Juno Awards a couple of years ago in London. Jeremy Dutcher was there, and the Snotty Nose Reds kids were there, and they had an Indigenous category, and I thought that was really good. It was exciting. You know, we have our own category. We get highlighted quite a bit. But I had a negative response from a couple of those bands. They said, well, why do they have to classify us in their own music when we're just as good as everybody else? So what's your opinion on that? Like, is it okay to have our own categories, or do you think we should just fit in with everybody else?
Well, so I believe that was a problem. I don't know how long ago that was.
It was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Yeah.
3 years ago. Yeah. So at the time, it was a big problem, right? So because Indigenous artists wouldn't get the full recognition they deserve, and you'd put, you know, a hip hop artist, a country artist, a rock artist, all in the same category, and there's only so many, you know, nominations within that category, right? So you'd have all these Indigenous musicians in one category, and that's not, I mean, it's not right. It's not fair. But since that time, the last Junos in February, there was a record number of Indigenous artists winning awards outside of the Indigenous categories.
Okay.
Yeah, and multiple Juno winners, like Asanabi. He won 2. I believe it was a songwriter, and I can't remember. I'm sorry, I don't remember the other one. But there have been multiple Indigenous artists outside of the Indigenous category, which is amazing.
Because we're good songwriters and performers and all those things, I guess, even producers. And I think that's starting to get recognized now a little bit more than ever. And that's what I like about, you know, what's going on in the Indigenous music world right now. I'd like to play a beautiful song by Gladwin. It's out on his Renegade CD called Animki Odeing. I hope you enjoyed that song. Now we'll go back to the interview with Gladwin. It's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, for sure.
We got to find a, because music, I think, is natural to us anyway. Like, if we did go back to that movie, The Rumble, it talks about the history of indigenous music, or music in general, but how indigenous people influence that. Like the banjo it's really a drum, if you kind of play it that way, and it's a mixture between the strings and the drum. But our people have been doing that for a long time. If you go to Six Nations, where you have a multitude of indigenous talent, but other First Nations, also have musical people in their family. I had two brothers that were, you met my brother Clifford, he had a band when he was growing up, and the influence was always there, to have music. And then when you go to our powwows, which you're also a powwow coordinator for the university now, and we have our own style of music, that gets us excited, right? And I think what I've seen in you in the last little while since I've known you, like, it's even helping you draw to your own culture a little bit more too. So you are now the Eagle Staff Carrier for the University of Waterloo, which is a pretty significant role. You didn't even talk about your veteran status. Here. You are a veteran of Canadian Forces, and so you've done a lot of things, and I can see it kind of melting together now. Your culture, your music, your roles. Here. Are you finding, maybe you don't see that, but I'm just watching from the amount of time I've known you, how you've kind of fit all those things with really high, honesty and the way you're doing things here at the university. So I really, think that's really great.
Yeah, I since I started my, educational journey, I guess, I've been, I always had, a goal in mind. First off, just to finish university, finish my studies, and seeing what doors open, at the end, and I lived for the longest time with like so much uncertainty of what that's gonna look like. Where am I gonna end up? Where does this all lead? And then I tell people this, and where I am now, and everyone says, you are where you are right now is where you're supposed to be, and I believe that because my culture, my music, my veteran status, all of these things, I feel like here in this university, in this community, I feel I've embraced all of those things. So yeah, it's just amazing. I'm loving my time here, and it's just been amazing.
That's good, and we're happy to have you here. We put you on the limelight at our convocation just recently. You had to carry the Eagle Staff in for, well, we gave you the short group because we only had to do 5, I think, this time, but coming up in June, we'll be like doing 20. So, but we also bring a drum in, and we do an opening, with the Indigenous, part of that whole scenario. So it's really good. So, and I really think it's growing in a good proportion. Like we've come a long way in a short time, but now when I look at the talent of the people that are here, yourself included, like, we even talked about having some more Indigenous music, in maybe a course or something like that here. And, if we get our minds open at the university, that's another area that you can probably travel in teaching, and getting people aware of our music. And, I think the possibilities are endless, what we can do.
Yeah, for sure. I have this, passion project. Like I said, my going back to what I said about jazz music, and I have a really strong interest in Indigenous jazz, right? So during my research and while I was doing my master's degree, I'd reached out to a lot of Indigenous jazz musicians to get their experiences, right? And I would like I would like to grow this. It's a passion of mine to expose more Indigenous, aspiring Indigenous musicians to Indigenous jazz.
I think we're always looking for something new, and that hasn't really been explored yet, like to an extent that I think it can grow more. Indigenous music in relationship to contemporary music, how we can actually build something on our old traditions and keeping alive, that portion of who we are. Like when Native people, perform music, whether it's through a drum or whatever way we do that, it just has that foundational piece of who we are as a society. And I think this is an avenue that we can start to explore now.
Yeah.
Because Native, society is now looking at Indigenous people more than they have before. And it's just not all the negative stuff, the residential schools and, the murdered and missing women, all that stuff, it's there. But look beyond that, of who we are. Music, we understand traditionally, comes from our heart. We're born with a rhythm. Every person has a heartbeat. And I think that that component of music, it's born within us. So a child that people attend powwows and that type of thing, a child of a family that attends those will bring a child to a powwow and set the child right next to the drum. And everybody thinks, wow, how can that baby sleep to that drum? But the connection to that is the heartbeat that the child heard in the womb of the mother. Mm-hmm. And it becomes like so natural to them. Mm-hmm. So when they hear that rhythm, you think it's loud to them, but to them it's comforting. Mm-hmm. So music to us, I think, is just intrinsic to us. It's born with that, and I think we can grow from it.
I agree, 100%.
Now, then when you put it all together, like your culture, your music, your experiences, I think that just leads you with so many different avenues, how to, formulate your future, of putting this all together. And I think that's the most exciting part about it.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can do that. We got influences, I think, I was around in the 70s, right? So when Redbone came out, there was another band called Exit. I don't know if you ever heard of them before, XIT, but they were kind of big at the time. And nobody knew Indigenous people can play contemporary music. And then when you watch like Rumble, you'll see Jesse Davis and so many people that were involved with big stream bands that they couldn't say that they were Native because they never would have succeeded. Mm-hmm. But they were there, they were in part, Ozzy Osbourne had a Native person in his band, and so many of them did.
Yeah. Well, so there's this thing that, I think we're starting to move towards, the music industry is, at least in Canada, is starting to, move away from this whole idea of Indigenous music and, what is Indigenous music. We're not just, traditional drummers. We're not just, fiddle players and all this. We're actually, we have a lot of talented people, and they just keep popping up. We're some of the most talented. We have some of the most talented musicians in the world. But when I was talking to some of these jazz musicians from the South, from the U.S., they were still expected. They're still expected when they're asked to perform as an Indigenous artist. They're still asked to. They're asked, well, where's your beads and where's your feathers and stuff like that, and they're like, well, where's your beads and where's your feathers, So, but yeah, I think it just kind of. Up here in Canada, I think we've moved past that, which is which I'm grateful for, but we still have a lot of work to do, globally.
You reminded me of that song from Murray. Do you know Murray Porter from Six Nations? He's a blues singer, but he came out with a mainstream CD a few years ago, and he's got one song in there called "White Man's Card." It's about how we go across the border and we have to show our status card. So he goes to the border, and instead of the guy asked him for his status card. He says, well, first I want to see your white man's card. It's so important for us to get through hard times. Even when I talk about residential schools, we always had that sense of humor that was able to come through, and not to be offensive at all, with that statement, but it's a matter of how we were able to find our passion, our health, and humor.
Yeah, exactly, and not take it so personally. Even though I think it's just exactly what you said. Just kind of giving it to him, but in a humorous way, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's coming across in our songs, and people like it. It's not like offensive in that sense, but it's a matter of our true history. Because we do have to show our status cards when we cross the border, and there's still a lot of stereotypes of our people. When you go to stadiums in the States, I know some of them have been taken away, some of those things, but some of them haven't. So we still fit that realm of our beads and trinkets and things like that, and that's what people expect. But I think if we can kind of change that scenario, Indigenous people have the talent of everybody. If we can get out of that stereotype mode and maybe look at us as musicians, as environmentalists, and people who care about those types of things rather than just the negative stuff that they hear every day.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe that's what your music will do, now that you've kind of ventured into this this new creation of your own music and stuff like that. So are there any messages in your songs, or are they just like...
Well, yeah, so, I mean, Renegade, for me, like I was talking, trying to write this melody and trying to find this song, or this sound. So I found the sound, I found the chord progression, I found the melody, but, so this song has taken, it's morphed over the time. I've recorded it, I've re-recorded it, number of times, and now I'm finally, I've whatever you're gonna hear on Friday, that's the sound. Renegade. To talk about Renegade and the melody and what I was feeling when I was writing Renegade was, so at the time we were all under, I think it was lockdown. We're in the COVID times, right? And when I opened up, social media and stuff like this, and I saw the 215 unmarked graves at the Kamloops residential school, I saw a lot of, online hate and deniers and all of this stuff, and it got me really angry. So I didn't really know how to channel that. So, and I had this song that I really wanted to finish. So, a lot of my inspiration came from just anger into that song. But like I said, that song was a lot more angrier when I first wrote it. And then, like I said, I met up with this producer, and he and I worked it together, and it, it's a lot less angry and just a little, yeah.
Okay, that's good to know, because there's got to be a reason that we produce and create those types of things, and it's nice to know that those songs have meaning for you. So going down the road, when you're 75 years old, you look back at a time when you were thinking about things, and this is how it came out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to the next project, right? So this is a milestone, and I'm happy. I'm happy to get it out there, and I'm happy to share it with everybody, and I hope you enjoy it. But I'm really looking forward to the next project, because I'm looking for continuous growth as an artist, as a musician, right? So that's my next goal.
That's good. That's good. So like I said, it's nice to have you here, and we're learning from you too. So it's a good exchange of knowledge. But all your events that you're putting on here at the university, we get a chance to come and talk to you about certain things. I know people came up to you at the powwow and got to get to know you here in our community. So we welcome you so much. So thanks, Gladwin, for joining me on Niche Vibes. you're always welcome back, and maybe you can bring your guitar next time.
Yeah, I'll make sure to teach you a couple chord progressions here.
Okay, we're looking for a song that we can play every day, so every show. So just put that in your ear.
Okay.
Anyway, thanks, Gladwin. It was an honor to have you here
All right.
today. I want to let everybody know this is coming up to this season. We're going into storytelling. So Niche Vibes, we try to touch on everything that we can, cultural and contemporary, things that are happening. We did lose a very valuable member of our community last week, Mr. Murray Sinclair. He did so much for our people, developed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, calls to action, and final report. So I always want to give thanks and honor to the people that have done great things like that, and to build a platform for you to experience what's happening in the Indigenous world. So Niche Vibes is really about that. There's no script to our show. It's just a matter of us coming on and chatting about things and letting you know what's happening. So I want to give you a little tobacco, Gladwin, just participation today and being able to express, your thoughts here today on Niche Vibes. So until we meet again, we say in our language, Bamapi, which means we'll see you once again. And Coabman, it's great to know you and to develop a good friendship for our future. So I want to thank our technician, Abby, for being here and helping us along with the technical part of the show. And here at the University of Waterloo, we'll see you again next time. Bamapi, Minwa, Chimigwets, everybody.